Hello everybody. We are happy you are all here and I hope you are all healthy and safe. Today this webinar is about choosing the right needle. The right needle for the procedure and the right needle for the client. On this topic we have received many questions and we will try to answer them all. But if you have any question, you can send in a message and maybe we can answer it during this webinar or otherwise later. I will do this webinar together with Consuelo Rinaldi from Italy. I'm Alec Kurutz from Amsterdam, and this webinar we want to give you more background information about everything what you need to know for the needle. And we received many questions for this. We received questions like, what is the best needle for the powder brow procedure? And which needle can I use best for strokes or for lips? Well, these are all questions about the right needle for the right procedure. But we also get questions like, what is the difference between brands? And what is the difference between regular micropigmentation needles and tattoo needles? Well, we will try to answer this topic also. And then we have questions everybody meet during practice, like, when I do the lips, it's always bleeding. What do I wrong? What is the best needle? Or I'm working, but I have to work so long because the needle doesn't give any pigment into the skin. Well, this webinar will take around 1 hour. And we try to give you background information so that you self can solve all these problems. Now, I and also Consuelo, we belong to the Ecuri team. And we really believe that the Ecuri needles are the best in the world. But if you are working with something else, this webinar will be good for you too, because you will understand much more about the needle you're working with. So, I'm going to start. Well, the first question we have to ask is, what is the purpose of the needle? Why do we use a needle when we want to make micropigmentation on brows or lips or whatever? Well, we need the needle to open the epiderm. We need something sharp. When you do just a massage with pigment, the pigment will not go into the skin. So we have to open the skin, but it's very important that when we open the skin, that we harm the skin as little as possible. We don't want too much trauma. By everything you do, this is very important. And we will talk later, but you will have less trauma and less harm when you work more soft and less deep. Well, when we go to the needles, then you can make 4 characteristics in the needle. First of one is the diameter. How thick is the needle? The second one is flexibility. And many times forgotten thing is the flow of the pigment. How easy flee the pigment from the needle into the skin. Sorry for my English. And also the point, the taper. How sharp is the needle? This is also a very important question. Well, the first 3 things I will explain very quickly. The taper and the sharpness of the needle, Consuelo will explain, and she always also will tell more about how to use the needle, how to get your best result with your needle. First, the diameter. The diameter is the thickness of the needle. You have thinner needles and more thick needles. And the diameter is many times not on the packaging. A lot of manufacturers are not very clear what they put in the cartridge. But it's for you very important to find out what is in the needle. Because the diameter is one of the characteristics which makes your needle the right choice or not. The second one, the flexibility, is also very important. We like very flexible needles. For micropigmentation, whatever procedure you do, we always work on a very delicate skin. And if the needle is flexible, it harms less. This is why some people like the flex needle and the flex pen very much, because this needle is very flexible. And also the long time liner use acupuncture needles. And these are also very flexible. Long time liner makes also cartridges, but nobody wants them. They all want the old system with a very flexible needle. And also in our needles, like the nano needles, like the nano 1, the nano 2 and the nano tube, these are also very flexible needles. And you can see this very easily. If you take the cartridge and you pull them out, you can see that the needle is like a feather. It's very flexible. If you do this with a one liner needle, it's hardly possible. It's much more stiff. And this flexibility is one of the reasons why this needle is loved so much by many artists. Well, do this just once. And the flexibility makes also a very big difference between tattoo needles and tattoo cartridges. And I have to show you the picture. For let's say 10 years ago, there were no tattoo cartridges. Every tattoo artist worked with a needle on a bar. And this is not flexible, it's a very stable system. Because tattoo artists like to make liners and they want a needle who does not bend. And they need this much more because the skin on your back or your arm is much more thick than the skin on your face. And when you take a look at the cartridges, for instance, the Quadron cartridges, you can still see that the needle is welded to the bar. The Quadron needle is much loved by tattoo artists, but it doesn't have the flexibility of the nano needle. Well, there's another brand which people like very much, and a lot of talk about, the Vertex needle. But also the Vertex needle has a little bit less thick bar, but still this is a bar and a needle is welded to it. And if we compare this with a micropigmentation needle, the micropigmentation needle is just one needle. Because we want it very flexible, because it's harming the skin less. Well, actually there is only one brand in the tattoo needles who make real micropigmentation needles, or needles like micropigmentation, and this is the Unica needle. These fit on tattoo machines, but they are just the same as micropigmentation needles. So if you, for one or another reason, like to work with a cyan or bishop or whatever machine, tattoo machine, I think this needle comes most close to micropigmentation needles. Okay, we go back to our list about characteristics. Another important thing is the flow of the pigments. We all know from practice that sometimes we are working and the pigment does not go into the skin. It looks, we are sure that we suck up the pigment, but the pigment doesn't flow from the reservoir to the tip, to the point of the needle into the skin. And this has to do with the smoothness of the needle. If the needle is very smooth, and then the pigment flow is less, or sometimes even nearly zero. This part of the needle needs to be a little rough. Actually, it is specially made rough, because if the needle is rough, it flows more easy. If you take a look at nano needles, you will see that they do not shine. They look a little bit grey. Because if the needle shines, it's very smooth. And if it's too smooth, the pigment doesn't stick enough to the needle. So you have trauma. You clearly see that the needle opens the skin. Sometimes you even have blood, but no pigment. This has to do with the smoothness of the needle. The needle is too smooth. This needle is not good for this type of skin. One of the reasons why the nano needles are loved by so many people all over the world is this, the roughness. And tattoo artists know this for many, many years. I go back to this kind of needle. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ago, tattoo artists used to make their own needles. They just bought bars and they bought needles and they welded them together. And, well, some clever ones also understand that the pigment flow was very important. And after welding them, they put them into the acid. And acid eats a little bit of the iron away, so it makes the surface rough. And this way, the pigment flow was much better, and there was much more pigment absorbed into the skin. So, many times forgotten, but the pigment flow, the roughness of the needle, is very, very important. Well, in these times, when we still were tattoo artists were working with a bar, hygiene was a very big problem. And actually, it's still a problem. And this is also the reason why everybody starts to work with cartridges. But we have to be careful, because not all the cartridges are 100% safe. And I will give you now some information about the manufacturers of the pigment, of the needles. Because we love the Ecuri needles, and we truly believe they are the best, but we do not make them ourselves. They are produced in a company in Germany. And I have here a list of different manufacturers of the pigment. Our needles are made by Derm. This company is the biggest micropigmentation company in the world. They are located in Berlin, and they make the needles for us. They make the needles for Nouveau Contour. They make the needles for Amia, for Swiss Color, and also for Cyan. this is seen as the best needles, and these needles are very, very safe. They might be a little bit more expensive than some Alibaba needles, but you get the real quality about thickness, about pigment flow, about flexibility, and also about safeness. There is another company from Korea, Bomtech, and they make the BB Glow needles. And this company, all these needles, the company itself is in Korea, but all these needles are made in China. And well, they are a little bit less quality than the empty dam needles. And then we have a bunch of needles who are coming from China. If you Google or Alibaba for 1 minute, you get at least 1,000 people who want to sell you these needles. And, well, you cannot compare these needles with the German needles. Well, you can say this needle cost only €1 or £1. Well, for €1 it's not a bad needle. But you cannot compare this with the European brands. And these needles have a real safety problems because they copy many of the needles and they fit on our machine, they fit on the Nouveau Contour machine, and they are only 10% of the price, but they do not contain a membrane. And the membrane is important so that the body fluids of your client, the blood and other things you don't want, will not get into the pen or in your hands or in your system. And, well, there are some disturbing surveys now that are nearly all the Chinese needles are not good. So you have to be very, very careful with this. And I had this webinar this morning in Dutch, and a lot of people get angry with me. But it is what it is, you know. Even in China, they want to use European needles, and the Chinese only produce for us. So I would say, be careful with this. And this is also the reason why these needles are a little more expensive. And you have to be careful that you do not pay European prices and get a Chinese product. Well, you can recognize them easily because they are all packed in sacks. How do you call this? Bags. They are all packed in bags like this. And you can get them from Nouveau Contour, from Amiya, from Swiss Color, from Mercury. But this is not the real stuff. The real needle comes like this, and they are all very well packed in blisters. So if you still want to work with these needles, don't pay more than €1 or €2. This is the price. So this is about the diameter, the flexibility and the flow of the pigment. I hope I explained it clear to you and my English was correct enough to understand. And we're now we'll go to the topic of the taper, the point of the needle, how sharp is your needle, and this will be done, explained by Consuelo.
Do you have a picture?
For you. This one?
Okay. So, hi again. I will explain about a very important characteristic of the needles, which is the taper. The taper means the point of the needle, and we can divide it in three three different types. We have a short taper, which is also called bullet-shaped taper. We have a medium taper or a long taper. What is different between those three tapers? So how shorter the taper is, how less sharp the needle is. So a very long taper makes the needle very sharp, and a sharp point can easily cut the skin open. So with for example, 1-point micro needle, talking about our permanent makeup or the empty derm permanent makeup needles, we have different diameters, like Alec told you a few minutes ago. We can have one liner or one micro needle which have the same diameter, 0.40 millimeters, but actually one has a short taper, the one liner, and the other on the opposite has a long taper, and it has a huge difference in the skin because we only work with a point with a point of the needle, and you clearly see that the one micro is a lot sharper than the one liner, and that makes the micro needle very it can cut very easily the skin, and it can make the skin bleed more easily. Okay, about the 1-point needles, my favorite needles are the nano needles. They are quite new in the market. We only have them since a couple or maybe 3 years ago. We have 3 different kind of nano needles. The 1-point nano number 1, which is the thinner needle on our range. We have it has a diameter of 0.20 millimeters and a medium taper. Then we have the nano number 2 and the nano tube, which are my favorite. They both have a diameter of 0.25, but what makes them different is that the nano tube has a metal tube on the top of the cartridge, and that makes the needle actually more stable. So I prefer him, for example, to do hair strokes, because you can make very sharp line. It's a little bit the same system like the acupuncture needle, which has a separate tip with a metal top on it, and this needle is just more stable, and so it makes better lines. But for example, if I do the ombre brows, I prefer to use the nano number 2 instead of the nano tube. Like I told you, the metal part, the needle is the same, but with the metal tube you get a little bit less pigment in the skin. So the nano number 2 work quicker. So lines, nano tube or nano 1 or nano 2, but the tube is more stable. And to make a shady, pixel shady or ombre effect, you can use the nano number 2. So that's about the taper. We have a lot of needles. We sell around 20 different kind of needles, and I will explain a little bit what's the difference between one needle and another one. So let me go to the whiteboard. So in the last year, with the new techniques, we prefer to use small needles. Almost every company switched to the 1-point, the techniques with a 1-point needle, like the pixel brow or lips or eyeliners. because with the 1-point needle you harm less the skin, okay? It's less harmless, and actually how less trauma you cause during the work, how easier and quicker the healing goes, so you can have a better retention, okay? Later I will let you see something on the latex about the new techniques, and I will explain better why the 1-point needle is less traumatic. But we also have prong needles with different configurations. You can have 3-point, 5 points, 7 points, 9 points, and also what makes them different between each other is how they are welded together, okay? You can have liner needles or shader needles. So you can have a needle which is better to make lines, and one needle which is better to fill. It doesn't matter if you are doing a very fully colored effect or full effect or shading effect. Not talking about the 1-point now. What's the difference between a liner needle and a shader needle? So actually, when you want to do a line, for example with a 3-point needle, you don't want to have 3 different lines, visible lines, but you want to have a needle which actually acts like a 1-point line. You want one sharp line. So for that reason, the liner needles have a welding point which is very low, close to the point of the needles. I have here the picture. We have a picture, so you clearly can see the difference. This is a power needle, and you can clearly see that the needles are very, very close to each other. When you insert this needle in the skin, this will act like one needle. Those needles are fixed together. They can't move, okay? On the opposite, this is a shader needle. I pushed it a little bit on the paper to let you see what is actually happening if I put the needle on the skin. The needle will spread. So actually, they will not act like one needle, but they will open in the skin. They can, of course, release more pigment, and they can stay more shallow because the energy will be spread also on the lateral. Okay, sorry, my macaroni English. I'm Italian. Okay, so big difference between liner and shader is that the liner needles are fixed together. The shader needle can spread a little bit, and they are going more shallow and more equal in the skin. But one thing I want to tell you, they are the needle choice. I will explain the characteristic of the needles, but the needle choice is still very personal. There are in the world a lot of artists which developed amazing techniques, and they can do, for example, with a slope needle, amazing hair stroke effect. So that you can adjust the technique and use different needles. This is general information. So, talking about our brand of needles, if you want to do a very sharp line, then you have to buy the power needle. Power needle is the one I showed you on the picture 1 minute ago on the TV. It acts like one needle. We have 3, 5 or 7 point power needle. If you want to have a soft line like a pencil effect, then you can use a 3 liner or a 3 micro needle. Those two needles are actually a little bit hybrid. You can use it for a soft line, but also to make a shading or to fill an eyebrow, for example, or an eyeliner. Then you have magnum needle. This is an old concept needle. It came actually from the tattoo. In the tattoo, before I used to be a tattoo artist, we used a lot of magnum needles because you have to fill very quickly big surfaces on the skin. So you take a bigger configuration. But for my personal opinion, these needles are harming a lot the skin, so I don't prefer them. Then you have another special needle, actually 3, the 4-point flat and the 3 and the 5-point slope. Actually, we have also special slope needles, the nano slope, and those needles are a little bit complicated to use, but they are also hybrid. You can use it in a line to make very easily sharp lines, but you can also move them in the skin and do combination of movements to fill in very quickly or do beautiful shading. But these needles are a little bit complicated, but we also have them. I hope this was clear. Do we have any question about this? Okay, then I switch to something else. Okay, I try to explain this as clear as possible. This is concerning the lines. I'm not talking about the ombre technique, the shading technique. This explanation is only about the lines. So using a PMU device, we have a lot of different things we can adjust to make our work better, to perform our work better. Talking about, I made the example with the 1-point needle, but it's the same with a 3-power needle. It doesn't matter, but on this way it's more clear. So you can use a needle in different inclinations and also move the needle in different ways. So you can keep the needle straight, perpendicular. Sorry, maybe this word doesn't exist, but 90 degrees on the skin, so straight into the skin. The release of pigment in this way will be a little bit less, and now I will explain why. Then you can keep the needle on an angle, but you can move it in 2 different ways. You can push the needle, the orange tell you the direction of the movement. So keeping my needle like this, I can push into the skin, or I can release the needle, okay? What's the difference? We all know that the needles move vertically in and out of the skin. Actually, when we push the needle in the skin, it will be more harmful for the skin. This is more traumatic. Why? Because the point is moved forwards, and when the needle is exiting from the skin, it will cut. So you will have cut and then a prick, and then a cut and then a prick. So this is more traumatic for the skin. On the opposite, if we release the needle from the skin, when the needle is going out from the skin, it will not be able to cut because my point, the sharp part of the needles, is on the opposite side. So when we are moving like this in the skin, we will only prick the skin. So we can make pricks, only punctures in the skin, and we are not cutting the skin. The pro is that this will heal more faster, and this is softer for the skin, less traumatic. So I recommend to work with in this way, to release the needle in the skin. But sometimes we all know we have thick skin which is not taking properly the pigment. For example, sometimes client with alopecia, when you are doing a realistic eyebrow, they used to have a more greasy skin on the T-zone, and sometimes the skin is not catching the pigment properly. So what can I do to make the flowing of the pigment in the skin easier? Well, you can work on this way. You can push the needle in the skin, and this is more traumatic, so not suited for any skin type, but with a hard skin. If you can get the pigment in the skin in this way, you can try to move pushing with the pushing movement. Okay, I hope this was clear. Why is this releasing more pigment? Well, of course, if you work with an angle, the penetration of the needle, first of all, is easier because the energy will be released in another way, so the puncturing of the skin is easier. But actually, you have more needle in contact with the skin. So on these two ways, you can release more pigment. And maybe it's a good idea one time to try it on the latex. I will let you see. You can clearly see the difference between those three movements. So to resume what I told you, if I want to do an outline which must be invisible after healing, for example, a contourless lip or a powder brows, we still work with the outline because it's very important to keep the symmetry and the right shape and not to lose it while working. But it's also very important that the lines will not stay after healing. So to prevent that the lines are too deep or too visible, you work with 90 degrees angle, okay, straight in the skin. For example, if you are doing a hair stroke technique, then you can work with the release technique. This is my favorite and it's recommended for any skin type. But sometimes, like I told you, it's not going properly, the flowing of the pigment, the skin is too thick and it will be difficult to insert the pigment. Then you can try to work with this technique by pushing the needle in the skin. Okay? Was it clear? Do we have any questions? Okay. So about the push and release movements, I understand it will be not so easy to understand for any of you, but I will try to let you see on the latex what more to be more specific and let you see what I'm talking about. So you can work van jou af. You can work yeah, away from you or and towards you. I like to work towards, in always towards me. But there are many good artists that work away from them, and they are really performing amazing works. But you have to have a good feeling with the movement, so there is no rule. But what is the difference? I will let you see a line with a release movement. So you are working with an angle between 60 and 45 degrees, and what you do is to move with the point of the needle to move backwards, okay? On the opposite, difficult skin, I can't insert the pigment, I need something more hard on the skin, then you can work okay? So this is the difference between release and push, okay? I hope this concept was clear. Talking about the new techniques, actually when I started a long time ago, we used a lot of prong needle with bigger configurations. I learned a long time ago to do the full lips with the magnum needles, and we used to use a lot of 5 round or 3 round needles, but in the last year almost every company switched to the 1-point needle techniques. The reason is with the 1 point you can harm less the skin. The skin will heal quicker, and thanks also to the new generation of pigments, we can work very shallow, and for example the lips and the eyebrow can really heal in a couple of days. And the result of using these techniques and working more shallow with smaller needles is that the skin will get less inflammation during the healing process. And actually inflammation will activate the immune system and also make the blood flow underneath the skin, and this will make the pigment rejection bigger. So actually in the last year we know it's important to harm the skin as less as possible to prevent bleeding during treatment and to promote a faster healing, okay? But not for everyone is clear how do I have to make a shadow, how do I have to make a whole brow with a 1-point needle, because who is in the business, not so young in this business, will think it will take a lot of time. Actually, it's not true. With a good technique, you can make an eyebrow in really no time, 10 minutes, okay? But you have to use a special movement and a special technique. Well, it's important to know that with a 1-point needle, I prefer the nano needles, which are very thin, so you can easily penetrate the skin. And this is less traumatic because it will go easily in the skin, but you have to be aware and not push the needle don't apply pressure, because you have to avoid to work deep in the skin. Okay, if you see during the procedure that the skin is bleeding, then you have to switch the movement, to change the movement, and to work more shallow. So I let you see what about the ombre technique. Maybe I need to find a good position. It's not very good for me, but maybe you can see better. So when we are doing the, for example, the powder brows or the ombre, any company gives this its own name, but it's all about the same technique. We are moving like pendula, yeah, I don't know, pendulum. So what we are doing is actually this. And you can see that I'm creating little points. That's why some brands call this pixel technique. I'm not making small points, but with my movement, because don't forget, this is a pen, and the needle is moving downwards and upwards like a sewing machine. So actually adjusting the speed to the movement of the end, I can create, instead of a line, small dots. Where is it? Small dots in the skin. And what does this mean? This means that between each puncture, between each dot, my skin is still is not harmed. So this will heal very quickly. If you prick blood in a few minutes, in less than a minute, the puncture will be closed. And they are working with a very big needle.
You mean injection in your arm?
Yeah. No. When I going to take blood in the hospital, and they are working with a syringe needle, which is quite bigger. We are only, and they are puncturing all the layers of your skin, because they need to take your blood. When we are working with this, we only want to go a little bit under the epidermis, so in the upper layer of our dermis. So it's really shallow in the skin. I think 0.5 millimeter for most of the time. So this will heal very fast, okay? And don't forget that also during the treatment, blood and lymph will reject the pigment. So with this technique, you will have only a little bit of lymph and almost no blood. So it will, the retention of the pigment is really amazing. So how can you do a brow with this technique? I will do it very quickly because we only have 10 minutes and free hand, so don't be mean. Okay, I'm doing now the outline of my eyebrow. This is also, you will also do this on the client, otherwise you will lose the drawing during the procedure. Don't forget that any skin is different, so don't expect, like we are like with the old techniques, to move one time the needle in the skin and immediately see the pigment flowing in the skin. Actually, this must be put on layers, very shallow. You have to be patient, and when you use when you get used to the movement and the technique, you will work very quick. In the early beginning, you have to get used to the movement, because it's totally different from what we learned long time ago. Okay, so now we have the outline, and now we can fill very quickly our eyebrow. I prefer to use dark colors for this technique because I work very shallow, and with a dark color you can work very quickly, and you don't have to saturate the pigment a lot in the skin. You can keep it more transparent. Which is the correct speed for this technique? So the speed is an Ombre, and the speed goes together with the movement of your hand. For example, if I want to do a sharp line, very, for example, hair stroke or lip contour, which must be visible, I work with a slow movement and a high speed. For our machine, it is between 110 and 115. If I want to do this kind of shading, I can move slower, and then I can put my machine on 100, for example, but I can move also very quick, and then I have to put the speed higher. Why? Because if the speed is too low, according to the fastness of the movement, instead of small dots, I will have lines, okay? And don't forget, a line is a cut, and it will harm the skin more than a point. So to make these small pixels, you have to adjust the speed of the movement with the speed of the machine, and the ideal speed is between 100 and 125 according to your movement. Okay, so look how fast it goes. And what's good with this technique, you can make it how you want. You can make a more makeup effect with, for example, an evident eyebrow like the girls on Instagram. But you can also work on a very mature skin and make an idea of an eyebrow, very soft. So actually it's up on you how you combine the movements and how dark you will work. Okay, that's it. We can blend it a little bit more. We can make, for example, a very, very light beginning. Okay, so don't think working with the 1-point needle takes a lot of time. Of course, in the early beginning you have to get used on it, but like you see, we have empty skin between the points, so this will heal very fast with an amazing retention of pigment. Okay, do you want to add something, Alec?
Well done. Great job. Very good.
Are there any questions? Okay.
Well, I hope our explanation have clarified a little bit on this subject. I want to thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, you can always send them, and tomorrow this webinar will be on our YouTube channel. So if it was too fast or you want to look it up another time, you can do this. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.